Hello, all you cosmic travelers and wanderers. This is Darlene Vandergrift and K. Melissa Waterman, inviting you to join us today in our episode of Expansion from Within, Exploring Multidimensionality.
Let me introduce you to my friend and dear colleague, Darlene Vandergrift. She is a lifetime experiencer, a medical intuitive, and a multidimensional mediator for over 35 years. She's also an author, an artist, a teacher, and a mentor for spiritually invested people.
And K. Melissa Waterman is my friend and colleague, and she's an intuitive mentor, a spiritual teacher. She also works with energy on many levels. In the past, Melissa has worked with Dr. Joe Dispenza on his research team.
Join us on our journey of meeting multidimensional beings, exploring what it means to be human, and expanding our spiritual evolution. Nice to be here with you today. I was thinking about, how the first few episodes we really discussed multidimensionality, multidimensional beings, and then we moved, and most of our most recent episodes have really been about how to be human, how to keep our vibration high, how to manage, and how to be at a high enough vibration to stay connected and open to multidimensional beings. We've decided to shift the focus now.
Yeah.
You let me know that there's a being that is willing to speak with us today, and that's Saari.
Yeah.
Great. Is there anything that we need to know before Saari comes in directly?
Saari showed up for me pretty early on and she didn't really have a name. She was part of the original council. That was back in 92, 91, 92.
Mm-hmm.
And so I only knew her as a behavioral analyst because her voice would come in at times when I was working with someone. Information would come in that I would be going, no, I'm not doing that. I'd be having this conversation in my head. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that to this person. And it would just kind of be like, no, and after like 5-6 times of hearing the same thing, I would say that, and it would open something up for the person. That's how I met her. And it wasn't until years later that she gave herself a name, and I saw, and when I was doing the paintings of who she was and what she looked like, because she's a gray, and she's also part Syrian. So, but she looks more as a gray. I think that in our third session episode, I think we showed a picture of her.
And we talked about her quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And your history with her, which is great. Anybody can go back to the third episode.
And what I can say more about her is that, as a gray, what a lot of these council members, and I believe multidimensionals who I know or have worked with, is that they are in their own evolution, they're in their own transformation. And so early on with her, it was more of a black and white. Emotion didn't necessarily sit with her. There wasn't compassion as much, there wasn't empathy. But the more that we worked, and the more that she understood in my work that I was doing or working with the council, the more she became curious and interested in moving forward into understanding emotions better for herself, right? So that she wanted to experience that more in a open-hearted place, as opposed to be more head-oriented, mental.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, that gives me lots of questions to ask her when she comes in. So
Great.
Whenever you're ready, whenever she's ready, I'd be happy to meet Saari.
Yeah, so I can tell you, this is going to be a combination of me dropping into that space, as well as I might have to close my eyes and do that. But right now, she's in the original council room. That council room has changed in the last 2 years to be a white space, but now she's in the original council room around the oval table that I'm usually used to working with since 92, 93. So she's there by herself, and she's like just very leaning forward, very curious, like what you got for me, so yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so I just learned that Saari that you have an office or that your workspace is in Atlantia. And so I'm very curious about that, about what that's like, where is that? Anything you want to tell me at all about Atlantia, I'd be very interested to hear.
Yeah, so it's an office, not an office space. It would consider a lab space for her. It's quite large. I can tell you, I've been there in writing the book. It's part of the book. So it's my experience with her in the lab. She has or had, I can say right now, what she's telling me is that those experiments that I was privy to in writing about, she no longer does, because she sees the impact and influence that it's had on the beings that, including humans, that she's experimented on. And that in her own evolution, she's seeing that there's other ways to access not just human DNA, but there's other ways to access what's going on with an individual, as opposed to being an experiment that might be harmful to them. So her lab originally was to investigate and understand human DNA, and to, like, the jump that we had from the Neanderthal to that missing link, that didn't come from her lab, it came from Lemurian lab, because they are more heart-based. So there was something about the Galactic Federation wanting the Lemurians to take over that jump in advancing humanity in a way, to branch it from being, so that they had more intellect, they had more choice, they could span a jump across that evolutionary chasm, so that they had something more. So Lemurians in some way, and there might have been others that were involved in it, but the Lemurians, because that's what Saari is more closely related to, is the Atlantians and the Lemurians. And so she knows that they were the ones that in their laboratories, in their science, that they were the ones that advanced humanity for that jump. But in her lab, it was a different thing. She was looking for behavioral patterns that happen with humans. Like, why do they respond the same with fear? Why do they, how do you make them angry, and what part of the brain makes them angry? And is this part of their DNA? And if it is, how do you elicit that to either extract it from them or give them more? She didn't experiment at the level of creating a different kind of human or a different kind of being with more aggression, less aggression. She was more understanding the emotional level and the behavior about what makes humans tick.
Yeah, I have lots of questions about that, but first I want to ask, back to the Lemurians for just a moment, why did they want to have us bridge a gap, from Neanderthal to something more choice-based, conscious-based? What was there a primary purpose in altering our DNA at that time?
Yeah, the early humans were being used in the Anunnaki mines, as well as probably other places. I'm only familiar with the Anunnakis, that they used them as slaves. They wouldn't consider that in the Anunnaki mind. They were caretakers, humans that were willing to, because the size difference worked for them, right? So the Anunnaki that were much taller to fit in or have the expansiveness of working in a mine, or that they had to make that really huge for them to even be able to maneuver in it. But these humans that were more intellectual, that would carry out, they would carry out what they needed to do. They would take orders, they would do that kind of thing. It became obvious to the Federation that this was leading humanity in a way that they would be always slaves. And so there needed to be a jump. There needed to be something that would give them more understanding of what was happening, that they wouldn't just be followers, that they would be given more, sovereignty, that they would have a better intellect, that they would make choices based on their intellect. So they did jump it for that reason. And there might have been other reasons. Earth is a planet of defectors and refugees. So there might have been other reasons for why, but I only know about that particular Anunnaki piece.
Right. It's very heartening to hear that the Galactic Federation has been, I mean, of course it has, it makes sense now that I think of it, but I kind of imagined that the Galactic Federation sort of showed up later in our history because we were trying to blow each other up, and they were intervening on our behalf because our planet is in a way part of a whole that's very important. So it's kind of comforting to hear that they've been around a very long time.
It pretty much at the inception of humanity. Like if you take a look at the Prime Directive, which I don't know if there's anything above the Prime Directive, but the Prime Directive, as I get shown, it are 8 individuals that are light beings that are all connected at the shoulder. So I never see them separate. And they speak in one unit, they speak in unison.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding is that they conceptualized humanity, as well as probably many of the other beings that are on this planet. They conceptualized that. And then what they did is they handed that information to the Federation, which is multidimensional, of as many galaxy beings that we can think of, and more probably, where they would have looked at that information and said, okay, and then they would have created it. Like they would have made it happen. So it gets handed down in some way, a concept, so that it is vetted, so that it is understood, so that it's agreed upon as a whole, instead of somebody just going and creating something. So the Federation, as far as what I know, has been involved from early on in overseeing humanity. Can't interfere, but they can oversee.
Right. Well, and changing our DNA is a kind of interfering, one might say. The Federation agreeing that our DNA get a jump start, we get pushed a little bit. That's a kind of interfering, for sure.
It would be if there wasn't agreement on the early human stage. They couldn't do it without some form of whatever our early humans could understand.
Right.
That this is what we want to do, whatever that level of understanding would be.
Right.
There has to be an agreement all the way around, or yes, it is interfering.
Well, that's great. Again, mind opening for me. And back to Saari, I love that she has changed her mind about how she's doing experiments and has become more aware of other methods and more aware of what that impact might be to any of the humans that have been experimented on. And can we know, like, when those experiments began? Has that also been happening from the inception, or has it been more, in the 20th century?
The early stages of where she was involved is more about the early inception of understanding the dynamics of humanity at its earliest stages of the intellect, the behavior, what triggers them, what doesn't, the reptilian brain, all of that was part of her research.
Right.
Okay. Then you have that jump that happened with the Lemurians. So now we are more aware, awake, intellectually available. We make different choices. We're evolving at a faster pace because of the jump.
Mm-hmm.
Then her work became more about that part of humanity. What does that mean in that shift? What happened to us? How do we relate to each other? Because back then there was a different kind of relation. It was tribal. It was that. But this time there's more. We have more emotional capacity. We have more intellect. We have more capability of bringing in, our intuition increased, our psychic abilities increased, all of that increased in that jump. That was very fascinating for her to figure out, oh, now we have a new being, really, right? We have a new identity, a new way of being, a new behavior. And she started to research on that, but not doing the experiments that we see in the 20th century, that when somebody's abducted,
right,
there's, especially with the Greys, they get that reputation that, you know, they pull them off of this planet, they take them somewhere, they do whatever they're going to do with them. That's sometimes, a lot of times, is not pleasant, right, to the physical body. So she doesn't see herself in that way. She says that there's many Greys. There's many, just like there's many different kinds of humans, there's many different kinds of Greys, and that some of them are still in that behavioral place of very little empathy or compassion, and they just want what they want. And they're trying to understand something about humanity and how its physical body works, more so than in behavior. So she sees them as very separate from that, and their experiments, she's doing this to her hands, like she wants nothing to do with them. That the more separation that she has from that, the more she can claim for her species that there is something that is not so nefarious, and that they have potential to have heart.
Well, I just right away want to thank her very much for her heart and for her. I mean, I feel very similarly. There are kinds of people on the planet currently that I don't want to have. I want to keep separate from and keep my vibration higher. And so I appreciate that about her, that she would make that kind of choice, having had contact with us in a different kind of way, where she knows there's a lot of value to a different kind of way, maybe even asking questions of us, right? Rather than having to be intrusive or create pain or trauma to us. So yeah, I appreciate that about her.
She is bringing up something that she finds fascinating, very curious, and very perplexing.
Yeah.
Is humanity's humor.
Yeah.
She tries to emanate that. And she said most of the time she falls flat because she doesn't understand where it comes from. I've seen her do that, where she's put on glasses to look strange. And she tries to laugh more. She tries to be humorous, but it's like she's looking for like a giggle button.
Right.
That humans don't, she can't really find that or understand, like, where does that come from?
Yeah.
That people can have humor and can have not joy. There's a difference for her, for joy. Joy feels like she can open her heart to have that. She can have that peace. But the humor, the sarcasm, the humor that comes up in various different ways, she's tried multitudes of things to access that for herself, but she's perplexed.
Yeah, I don't blame her. I'm perplexed too. I mean, I have friends that are an easy laugh, and I find some of the things they laugh at to be ridiculous. Like, I don't find them funny at all. And they're having so much fun being an easy laugh. Like, they just laugh much more often than I do. And I am puzzled as well. I want that. I want to be an easy laugh. You know, I'm not an easy laugh.
Yeah, she's been following early on from the time things have been on TV, and things that were funny back then have moved into more of demeaning that is considered humorous, and she just doesn't know how the heart can stay open and at the same time say things about someone else that you think is funny.
Right.
It doesn't relate to what she knows about the heart expansion, and she's actually asking, how do I need to see this? Like, how do I need to see when somebody is on your media that is saying something negative about somebody that is in the audience or whatever, and everybody's laughing at that, when it feels to her, it's hurtful. What does that say about the person that's either doing that or the people that are laughing? It's, for her, it's more about the people that are laughing.
Well, it's true. It does say something about them, and it does say something about our culture in general, that there's I want to call it a lack of maturity in some way, a lack of heart. From my own studies as a psychologist, that there's all kinds of studies where humans don't help other people if the masses, like, we're mass oriented. So if the masses are laughing, we'll laugh. If the masses are only 10 people, 9 people will do one thing, that 10th person will have a moment of cognitive dissonance of like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
And then will likely go with that other 9 people. And nobody understands why that is. Some of the research I've read, it's a survival mentality. If I don't agree with the masses, I could get thrown out of the village and I'll be on my own and I can't survive. It would be nice if we adapted away from and were able to be humorous and kind and not poke at people or have to find humor in what is negative, because it does end up hurting people.
Yeah, her research in trying to find that, what she's saying is that we talk about the heart being blocked, but it actually numbs it. So that acceptance of the mentality of one person that could be a leader in some way that laughs at others or ridicules them, it numbs the heart to those that we call bullies. It helps perpetuate that in some way because it's acceptable in the big scheme of things. She sees numbing of the heart even more contagious than blocking the heart.
I think that that's really interesting and very good for us to know. I know that I can examine my own TV usage. Like there was a time when I would not allow myself to watch anything particularly violent or particularly scary. I did not want my nervous system startled, and I wanted to remain in a high vibration to the point where I wouldn't allow myself to watch it. And then slowly as years passed, someone was watching something and I wanted to be in with them and I wanted to know what they were talking about. So I allowed myself, and I can feel how my heart numbed from allowing my system to have what it isn't really good for it, isn't really good for me.
Yeah, she's saying it's no different than the experiments that she knows that has happened on this planet that were a long time ago with poison, whether that was reptilian poison, snake poison, herbal poison, where there were experiments done with humans for whatever reasons, that it seeps in.
Right.
So the poison of numbness seeps in to our culture. And she sees that as one of the biggest influences that we have that is numbing our hearts to become more. She said, like, there's more people now looking at the transhumanism. That is a whole other place of where humanity is being led on one level. And so that numbness is a segue into the transhumanism that we really need to pay attention to.
That's interesting. So I would take it to mean then that the transhuman isn't an evolutionary process that's creating oneness. Like I was sort of hoping that there was a positive process occurring.
There is a positive and an advancement with some of the technology, a lot of the technology, but then again, that technology moves into something else that won't be as advantageous to humanity, that will numb them, that will take them on another avenue of separation and division, or unified in some way, but through a different mentality and not compassion.
Not compassion. And the compassion is the important piece.
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything that Saari can tell us about regaining our compassion? Is there anything that we can do, to move toward or away from numbness and more compassion?
I'm sure there's other things, but the first thing that she's doing is she's doing this to her chest. It's that beating. It's like if you take your hand and you just put it right below that collarbone.
Your thymus. Yeah.
Yep. And you activate that. It generates a vibration through the body that is almost like, she's saying she discovered that it's almost like patting a baby on the back. Mm-hmm. That helps them burp, except this is keeping the heart more resonant with a higher vibration. So there's something about that like she said, people will hold this, like, oh my, they'll hold
Yeah.
it and nurturing themselves and whatever. But she said, when you are nervous, when you are feeling that, you're in a stress condition, that is a calming, actually, because the heart feels connected with, even if it's not the heartbeat, like it's not, it doesn't have to be that. It can be just a padding, a general rhythm of padding on that area. So she's bringing up that first. It's more about the mindfulness of when those around you are in a negative space or their language is harmful to others or themselves, is to be aware of how that targets and numbs the heart. So whether you say something to someone about defending someone, like they may say, oh, look at that woman over there, or, the derogatory comment. It's either coming back, there's several ways. It's either coming back with something that points out something positive about that person, so it balances, or it's saying something to the one that's giving that information that is unkind, it's not compassionate, you don't know that person at all, how could you say that, right? Or it's you separating from that energy so that you don't get involved with, like there's no response from you. Either any of those three feels like it sends a message back to them. And you might get ridiculed for that. You might get ostracized for that because you're not into agreement, or they're going to feel you're not into agreement, but that's holding our sovereignty.
Right.
And if we hold our sovereignty and we lead with that, and we lead with that in a unified way with others, then we create an energy field, is what she's saying. That's in her experiment. She found out that when she put humans together in a pack early on, that there was a significant energy field around them that was harmonious and not all separate. That's what we need to focus on and create in what we call communities.
Right.
To create that community harmony of how to function, how to be with each other. What is the mindset? How do we view others? We can carry that forward without the negativity that comes in. That's what she's saying, that creates a different, there will be no numbness then.
Wonderful. That is exceptionally good information. So I'm looking at our time and we've gone over 20 minutes and I'm wondering, do you want to go further or shall we save other
Let me
questions?
just see if there's anything important for her.
Thank you.
She would just go back to the Lemurian culture and say that at the time that they were both given permission, Atlanteans and Lemurians, which are not necessarily like Atlanteans don't look a certain way. There was many multidimensionals in both places. So it's a location rather than a culture, rather than a species.
Mhm.
So the Atlanteans were more of the head. They were more of the mental aspect. They were the builders. They were more of the scientists, trying to understand, bring in, open up, as well as experiment and dive into things that would, in some ways, their experiments were looking not just for humanity, but for other species, and understanding them that, in her opinion, were not kind, but they were more of the mental aspect. She's saying very much of what humanity is now with the labs that we have experimenting on animals, that we don't give them the honor that they need, or even that they have any intellect or purpose.
Right.
She said not much has changed in certain ways in that area, but the Lemurians, in coming from a different mindset, were still as intelligent, but they were more heart-based. So one carried on the planet because they existed not all the time together, but they existed they existed at the same time for a long period of time. So one would hold the head, the Atlanteans would hold the mind, and the Lemurians would hold the heart. And so it was more of a compatible relationship.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I have so many more questions. So I hope that Saari will visit us again.
As long as you can let her be humorous, she said.
She can practice her humor on us
You
all.
can practice on us, right?
I'm not an easy laugh, so I'll be a good person to practice on because I won't just laugh for no good reason. Yeah.
She's saying the only thing that got attention for her is when she was a mime.
Ah. Well,
yeah, so I don't know how that would work, but she enjoys doing that because it's a different kind of language for her.
yeah, it makes complete sense as a behavioral analyst that she would find it really interesting how people would react to her being a mime.
Yeah.
And I think she should keep working on the other kinds of humor, because it's she doesn't have to get mean, poke fun, but there's lots of ways of being humorous and making jokes, and I don't know where it comes from either.
She sees that it sits like right on top of the heart, right behind the heart, right, not totally behind the heart, but if you had a little crest over the top of the heart, that there's a laugh button there in some way. There's a activity place that she's curious about. Yeah.
Awesome. I want her to look also in the solar plexus area. There's something about humor coming from a little bit lower,
like the belly laugh.
Well, the belly laugh is an expression of that place that I'm getting a hit about. Yeah.
Okay. All right. She appreciates that. She's taking notes.
Oh, good. Well, I love that I could help her with her research. All right. So I think that's all we have for today. I want to say that if you have any questions about Saari, her timeline, about what she's discussed today, please visit soulunion.com, ask questions. We want to answer them. And I think we will continue the conversation as needed.
Great. Take care.